Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the District 58 webinar. This is Bob Swarner. I'm the Club Growth Director, and I'm very pleased to be introducing our speaker tonight. Lisa Berry has a 20-year career in information technology industry. She's a distinguished Toastmaster and has served the past 10 years as a technology consultant for the Department of Defense. On behalf of the U.S. government, she helps the 75,000 military and civilian government officials around the world who practice security cooperation to keep their nation safe. And this means a lot of negotiation, relationship building, and process improvement and change management, all of which have their share of conflict. The goal of this webinar is to bring us to a better understanding of conflict and equip us with some tools to help us better balance what may be an otherwise uncomfortable confrontation. I'll now turn this over to our speaker, Lisa Berry.
Thank you, Bob. Hi, everybody. I'm glad you could join me this evening for this session on how to resolve conflict and not think that conflict is so bad, and learn that conflict actually is a good thing, and it can be a good thing. But I want to ask you a question first. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where maybe you were talking or meeting a high-ranking official for the first time? Maybe you were just a little bit nervous because you didn't quite know what to expect, and you get into the meeting and you sit down and they look at you and the first words out of their mouths are, "And what the hell do you think you're going to do for me?" Ladies and gentlemen, that actually happened to me. And this is exactly how it felt. I felt about a half-inch tall when I sat in front of a 3-star general some 7 years ago at the Asia Pacific Center in Honolulu, where I was sent to go and help them with their software system, the system that I now support. And they were having some problems back then. Problems communicating their needs, and problems communicating their requirements. And the problem that actually ended up being the biggest problem of all is that no one understood what their needs were, how to get their needs across at their end, and then how to get what they needed from us. So there was this big, giant disconnect, and everybody was going to the director, who was a 3-star general, and complaining. Now, my boss at the time had sent me there as a consultant to help them out. And my words to him were, as I'm sitting there shaking in my shoes, because I've never sat in front of a 3-star general, much less had him yell at me instead of even saying hello. And I decided that this was the time for me to either sink or swim. So what I did was I listened to him. He told me all the things that his people told him. And then I said, "Sir, give me 24 hours and I'll show you that first and foremost thing that you told me was the worst thing that everybody was having a problem with will be resolved." And I was able to actually do that. And the reason I was able to do that is because I was able to communicate to the people that were the developers what their actual needs were. And that's where my liaison career basically really got started. I saw that people just weren't communicating with each other. There was such a large amount of conflict because what people were saying was not what people were hearing, and so they weren't even listening to each other because there was so much emotion, so much turmoil going on, that I decided this is an opportunity here. So what we're going to do in this webinar today is, first and foremost, we want to understand on simple terms what conflict is, why we need to understand where it comes from, and we can actually appreciate it so that we can not take it personally. Because when people have a lot of emotions, when people have things in their lives or situations that they perceive as a threat, then we get conflict. So we're going to talk about some strategies on how to manage that so that maybe the next time you encounter something at work or a situation at home or even in your Toastmasters club, how you can actually handle that situation and focus on making something that would otherwise maybe be a situation of turmoil or uncomfortableness, something that you can actually manage a lot better. And of course, we will definitely be taking questions, so please feel free to type them in the chat. Bob's going to help me monitor that, and we'll keep going forward. But I always start with this slide as this program has evolved. And I actually started with this conflict webinar. Well, it wasn't a webinar, it was a presentation in one of my Toastmasters club, because I saw it as a way to get through, hopefully, to our members instead of doing the Toastmasters moments of truth. Because a lot of times, people that have been, I found anyway, and people that have been in Toastmasters a long time, kind of, oh, I know what the moments of truth is, I know what it's all about, but I saw this as an opportunity to show them the moments of truth, of what was going on in our club in a different way. So when we think about conflict at the very high level, of course, you can see on the slide here, there's a lot of text here. Merriam-Webster's definition, contrary to different thoughts. Conflict is more than a disagreement between two parties, and I say that because there's a lot of emotion tied in there. People have feelings. And ladies out there, we are the most emotional of all. So that's the hardest for us, is to actually take away that emotion. And then there's people, if you're anything like I used to be, I would avoid conflict at all costs. I would internalize everything. If it was a situation of conflict where somebody just didn't like the way that I presented a bowl of potato salad, I'd go out of my way to avoid it. And that's not healthy for us either. So what I want you to do is take a look at this slide and think of conflict as its most simple terms. You either are a sender or a receiver, and you have a message that the other person needs to understand. I had somebody that was a really good mentor to me some years ago tell me that when I actually told her about this situation I had with the general. And she said, Lisa, this is what you need to think about. Forever think about sending and receiving a message. And when I talk to all of us as Toastmasters, what do we talk about with our communication skills? We talk about listening, we talk about sending a message, and communicating with one another. So those skills are the root skills that we learn as Toastmasters. So when you think about conflict, this is exactly the same thing on its most simplest terms. So you think, hey, we have fight or flight going on here, but if we stop for a minute and realize the person on the other end has a message for us, and we just need to try and understand what that message is. Now, going back to the 3-star general for just a second, I put this teddy bear on the screen just to let you know that in that situation, I did my best to be as polite as I could because that was my first day on the job. I wanted to be welcome there. I certainly didn't want to be known as anything other than somebody that was helpful. And I tried most of all not to take it personally. Now, for me, that was really hard to do because I like to take ownership of everything that I'm involved in. If it goes well, I take ownership of that, but if it goes poorly and I make a mistake, I take ownership of that and do what I can to rectify that mistake. But the thing is, at the end, that's how I felt. I felt like this guy was pointing a finger at me. Now I can tell you by the time I was done with my 3 years or 2 years at the Asia Pacific Center, I was more than welcome to be there, and we had a great rapport, and this general actually did retire, and I do go back and visit now at least once or twice a year when I'm assigned back to this organization. But the key thing that I've learned through the years is while we practice active listening skills, or we think we practice active listening skills, we often don't hear what the other person is saying. Sometimes we get so caught up in the moment that we think we hear what they're saying because we're so ready to answer that we don't stop and just let what they're saying resonate inside us. So that's one of the things that I've learned along the way that's really critical. Now, the next story I want to tell you about is the next time I met somebody that had basically a knee-jerk reaction to me, and I had never had this happen to me either. I was in the position that I'm in now. We had a brand new software development team that I was working with, and in the role that I have, I manage these people, but we don't work for the same company. So we have to all learn to get along, which is generally not a problem. But this company was brand new. This was their first big government contract. And what that meant was we all got together in Washington, D.C., and the CEO was there, and the vice president of sales was there, and the development team was there, and a project manager was there. And the day before, we had this big introductory meeting. And the biggest thing that I was asked was, what was your biggest problem throughout the history of this program? And I had been with this program since 2007. And I had said communication. Communication has always been the biggest thing that has been an issue, whether it's for us, the people working on the internal side of things, or whether it's our users or our customers out in the region. The line of communication always seems to be a gap, and I really want to work on that. So the way that you can help me, Mr. CEO, is to help your employees to understand that we're a team and we do things together, but that means that we all need to be on the same page. We all need to understand what the requirements are and what needs to happen for the greater good of the customer, because at the end of the day, they're the one that's paying for us to be able to be here to do this job. And he said he understood exactly what I was saying and that it wasn't a problem, and we'd go forward. And the next morning we have a roundtable meeting. And 5 minutes before that meeting started, my counterpart that's from Europe said to me, Lisa, I'm really concerned about something, and I need to bring this to your attention as the lead of our effort. And I said, what's the problem, Luo? Well, Henry and Bill said X to me, and that's not going in accordance with what they agreed to. I said, okay. If it's a concern for you, that makes it a concern for me, because I know he wouldn't bring something like this up if it really wasn't a problem. So we had the meeting, and we started off and basically went around the table. Did anybody have any questions, any feedback from yesterday, anything you wanted to follow up on? And I said, yes, I absolutely have something. I said, I'm getting a message here that already we're starting off going back down to our old methods and not communicating, and I understand that you three have already talked about something and are moving forward on a decision that none of the rest of the team knows about. And so what I had thought was going to happen was he was going to say, well, let's see how we can work on this together. But instead, this is what I got. And it was worse than the situation, unfortunately, that I had with the 3-star general. This gentleman was sitting around the table with about 8 of his employees, myself, my European counterpart, and he was yelling at me and just yelling. And I'll be honest, he was just yelling and yelling and yelling to where I got to the point that I had to stop and take a breath and look at him and say, if you can't communicate to me without yelling, I can't listen to you anymore. Because I don't think you even realize that what you're even saying or what you're trying to say. And the room got totally silent. And I saw him take a deep breath, and his face went from deep red to a little bit lighter red. And he said, you know, I'm really sorry. I should have thought to think where you were coming from and what you were trying to say, and instead I just had this knee-jerk reaction and started yelling at you. And I said, that's okay. We're here to work as a team, but I can't communicate with you if you're not willing to listen to what I have to say. We have to be able to reciprocate that level of communication. And honestly, to this day, he and I have a really good working relationship, and we've gone on in the program, and we're doing great. But it was just one of those things where I had to sit there and think about why was he talking like that? Why was he yelling? And the long story short is he was scared. This was their first big contract. And I think his fear and concern over the concern I was bringing up to him, he was taking it a little more personally than what we would have liked. But by the same token, he was taking it personally. So that showed me that he cared. So one of the things that I think you've noticed is, other than the general pointing the finger, is there was a lot of emotion in both of those stories that I told you. And the big thing that I can say that I've learned over the years is step back, take a deep breath when you're in a situation of confrontation or conflict. And sometimes that does mean you have to let the other person just run their course. They have to be able to run out of steam, if you will. But for you, the person that's the receiver, you need to remove the emotion. Because if you counter whatever they have to say with the same level of emotion that they have, you're not going to get anywhere. You're just going to end up firing off at one another, and you're never going to resolve whatever the real problem is. The other thing is, when you let them run their course, you're keeping an open mind, and you are practicing active listening, same Toastmasters skills that we had. But the other thing is, if you've have other people that happen to be involved in the conflict, sometimes there are a group situation, you want to make sure that you're talking about the issue at hand. So you're not talking about people's emotions, you're not talking about them from a personal point of view, but you're thinking about what that issue is at hand. And that means you need to start asking questions. If you're in a situation of conflict with somebody, don't assume what the problem is. Don't assume that everybody needs the same amount of attention. Don't assume that they think you know what is being said or what you or they are trying to communicate, because that will lead you down the wrong road. There is no reason why you shouldn't be able to ask them what exactly it is they're trying to tell you if you don't understand. Because a lot of times what I found is people are saying the same thing, but they're afraid to ask questions, or they're afraid to actually practice active listening so that the other person knows that they understand what they're saying. And of course, when you do find out what that problem is or what their concern is, put yourself in their shoes before you react. You got to practice empathy and objectivity. I have to do that. I'm very blessed that I do that a lot more naturally now than I ever did, because I have to do it every single day. There's always somebody coming to me that has some sort of problem, and I have to think about how changing or fixing that problem affects all the other stakeholders that I have. So I have to think, well, if one person doesn't like the fact that I use orange arrows on the screen, but I've got to think about the other 16 organizations that may prefer orange over blue. And that may seem pretty trivial, but when they're paying the bills, those are the types of things that I have to look at. So remember, you want to make sure you're listening so that you actually hear what they're communicating with you. And again, don't be afraid to ask those questions. Now, once you get to the point of asking questions, the other question you need to ask them is, what is the ideal solution they have for the problem, and why? I'm going to tell you, oftentimes, that's where people get stumped. You know, they come running to you with a problem and running up, and this is the problem, you need to fix it, you need to fix it. Okay, that's great. Let's look at the problem together. What would you propose as a solution? Why would you do that? Because once you do that, then you can actually start talking to one another on finding what that creative solution is. You're actually getting them to use some creative thinking skills instead of just sitting on their emotion and at the problem of the moment that they need to fix. They're actually working towards some sort of a reasonable solution. And the reasonable solution is, always remember that that solution is the solution that is fair under those current circumstances. And that's another hard one that people have really a hard time with. And I even struggle with it sometimes, because I have to sit back and think, okay, The problem that Michael had with Mary is that Mary is not producing her report in a timely manner. And we came to a solution on that particular problem at another time. But what if we have a case where we have a personality conflict? And how are we going to handle that? So you have to look, obviously, at every solution for its worth at that moment, that opportunity. So that's the strategies that I use whenever I'm looking or helping anybody with a problem. And then, of course, sometimes you may have other options. Maybe there's more than one situation that would work, but again, you're working on the best solution for that period of time. And that oftentimes, if you have somebody that's a mediator, or perhaps you're a mediator where you have two parties that are in conflict, maybe you're helping them to see which plan will help them move forward the best. And of course, be able to be open-minded when they do that. And then sometimes, though, you still have to get people to keep moving forward because they tend to try and digress back into that way of thinking, well, but last time they did this, or they always do this, and they always do that. But I can tell you that if you're the person that's on the even keel that keeps reminding people, okay, that didn't work in that situation, but we're in this situation in this moment, and this is the situation that we're trying to resolve. So let's not talk about that one in the past. Let's talk about solving and finding a solution for the issue that we're facing now. Because you have those people that are what I say, they won't save their drama for their mama, as it were. And so you really got to focus on that. And it's really hard sometimes because some folks are really persistent. The next event or scenario I want to talk about is the club member experience. So I had started off in this session talking about, if you came in a little bit late, I changed this or created this session or webinar or presentation way back when I was thinking of giving a Moments of Truth session for my club, and I wanted to do something different because I just felt like people would just turn a deaf eye or a deaf ear to everything and would just gloss over and just, yeah, we've heard all the Toastmasters Moments of Truth. So I thought this would be a great way, because we were having some issues in our club, to actually get folks to kind of spark some ingenuity in them and some ideas, and not just to be naysayers. And what was happening is, and I'm sure some of you have experienced this before, is the club didn't want to change. People didn't want to change. We had several people that knew we were in times of not making the best value to our members any longer because we were just a leadership club, and things had changed in the Low Country such that just we weren't having the members that we wanted anymore. The people, we were meeting at a restaurant, people felt obligated to buy breakfast even though they weren't, but yet the restaurant wanted us to actually pay, they expected us to have some people that were paying for breakfast. So there was a lot of things going on, and there were several members that really wanted to move the club onto a different location. And then there were people that, but we've met here since the club started, and so we don't want to move, and this is how we need to be, and we just could give you a list of why we shouldn't do this. And what I did in that presentation was I talked about how change is really hard for everybody. I don't think, some people adapt to it a lot easier than others, but we have that fight or flight autonomic nervous system that just, you either go into fight mode or you go into flight mode. And some of us are lucky enough to kind of linger around in the middle every now and then. But this was a situation of pull and push and pull that we had to get through. And I'll be honest, that particular situation or that particular presentation did not get us the results that we wanted. We didn't end up moving the club. But what it did do was it opened the door for opportunity for people to have more dialogue. And what I was able to do with the club is we were able to have more honest conversations on an individual basis as to why we really needed to look at what was best for the club. And so the end result of that it did take a little bit of time, and we did finally move the club to another venue. It's unfortunately moved a couple times since then, but we're in a good spot now. But now we're in that rebuilding phase once again, where people are energized and getting to the heart of why they became a Toastmaster in the first place, to enthrall and jump into what it is that they want to do, which is become better communicators, better leaders. And that means sometimes you have to change, and sometimes you have to adapt to change. Now, the problems, again, they were unwilling. They just didn't want to do it. And that, I'm sad to say it's a part of life. It's not ever going to change, but I think sometimes it's often in how you present things that make the difference. I tell people whenever I talk about Toastmasters, speech number 4 from the Competent Communicator Manual is my favorite, how to say it, because that's one thing, if I could say one thing I've learned from Toastmasters that's really helped my career, other than me not being such an introvert anymore. I'm actually more of what somebody called me recently, a situational extrovert. Is speech number 4, how to say it. You can say anything and talk to anybody about anything, but it's all in how you deliver it. How you say that is what's going to get you the reaction that you hopefully are looking for. And so that to me was critical for this particular situation. Whoops, sorry about that. Oh, my little mouse is going crazy. Sorry, guys. There we go. So one of the things that I talked about also when we were in the club, and I used this slide, this slide actually is from that presentation, because a lot of times we had situations where, well, you're a club officer or you're some kind of leader, and they're doing things that's not what I would have done, or they don't care about us. All they care about is getting what they need and what they want, and they don't care about us. And I know a lot of times in work situations, sometimes that happens with managers too. The employees feel that the leadership or the managers aren't doing what's best, or looking out for their employees in those situations as well. And the one thing I talk about is, again, putting yourself in the other person's shoes. And I'm not saying that every manager does the right thing, every manager makes the right decision, because we all know they don't. Just like every club leader doesn't make the right decision. Some of us, we don't. We do what we think is best for that situation. And unfortunately, in some cases in our work life, some people are in leadership or managerial roles that don't have the tools really to even be there in the first place. And it's unfortunate, because I think some companies could do a better job in training managers, and it's great to be promoted. I've been promoted to a manager way back in my previous life when I was in retail, and had no idea what it meant to be a leader. It's, they give you the keys to the store and they say, here, count the money at the end of the day, and then you're in charge of making sure that people do their job, but they don't tell you how you're in charge of that. They don't tell you how to talk to people, or they don't tell you what the best opportunities are for making the right decisions, or why you should make those decisions. But when it comes to the shoe on the other foot, as it were, the one thing I like to tell people is, think about, again, what the situation would be like for you if you were the person that were the leader making the decision, because it's really easy to blame somebody else when something goes wrong, but it's not so easy to think about what we could have done that either contributed to the problem, or what we could have done to maybe have helped that problem from even happening. And I'm not saying that you have to do that, but it's just one of those things with the reciprocating thought, as it were, to just think that what we're trying to solve is the best solution, or find the best solution for that particular situation. And sometimes it's unfortunately the case of, we don't always end up in the right situation, and things aren't necessarily what I would have done, but again, you weren't the one in that particular situation. So it's just a reminder for folks that, sometimes, if we're not in that situation of what the other person is doing or thinking, we don't know We know what we're thinking, but we don't know the whole story necessarily. So just something to keep in mind. Now, this is an interesting story I wanted to share with you because it actually is regarding a fellow Toastmaster that I actually have been coaching about a situation that they were having, and that actually turned out really well. And so I had told her that I was actually going to talk about this today and share this if she didn't mind. But basically what was happening is she was doing some work on a program, and the leadership of the program had wanted to meet with her. And what happened is it came across as if it was a meeting of conflict. So it came across as basically, let's get to the bottom of things meeting, and we're going to almost maybe get rid of you kind of thing. That's the feeling that she had talked about with me, that she had said she even postponed or actually canceled the meeting and wasn't even going to go to it. And because she was so worried about how she was going to react. And I could see just in her talking about it that she had started to get really emotional. And she said, you know, what happens is I tend to go into fight mode. I don't sit there calmly. And I know I'm going to overreact. So I just canceled it and said I wasn't going to come to the meeting. And I had actually gave, I believe it was, I participated in a meeting in the club, and afterwards she had came up to me and she had said, you know, it's through the words that you said that I'm going to actually go and talk to them. And so we talked a little bit more about what she could do, and I had told her about, you know, just take a deep breath, listen to what they have. It doesn't mean you have to react right away. Just let it sink in with what they're having, because maybe what the meeting is even really about is something that's positive. Maybe it's not bad. But the question I asked her before that was, if they said they wanted to meet with you, did you ask them what the meeting was about? And she said no. I said, well, I think it's fair for you to ask that question so that you know, so that you have some idea of what that meeting actually is going to be about. She said, I didn't even think about that. I'll ask. So she ended up going to that meeting, and I saw her at our club meeting a couple weeks later, and she came up to me and hugged me, and she thanked me because she said, this meeting went exactly the way you said it was. We found out that we were actually really on the same page. She just really didn't understand, the manager didn't really understand what it was that I was doing, and she really just needed more information on that, the effort that I was undertaking, because she wants to get on board, but she had no idea what it encompassed. So again, that goes all the way back to what we talked about in the beginning, was they're communicating, but they're not communicating enough to where the one person understands what the other person is even saying. So they had that opportunity to have that dialogue and have that question and answer and listening to hear, and that active listening going on. And they really didn't actually have a conflict after all. It was actually a perceived situation of conflict. So I'm really glad for her that it worked out the way that she wanted, and I know things are really going good for her right now. And for me, that's one of the things is why. You know, when people ask me for something, I've learned, I used to be one of those people that would, if you asked me for something, I would say yes. Didn't matter, you needed my help. I answered and I asked yes. And what I found myself doing was basically spreading myself out too thin. And one of my mentors said to me, you know, you need to think of yourself as a laser beam, and you need to focus your laser beam on those situations, and that you can dedicate yourself or your skills to the best that will best use your services. And what that means is, if I'm asked for something and I now learn to ask why. So give me a why, not what's in it for me, but why do you need my help? Why does that effort need to happen? So that I can start that dialogue and then go forward from there, because I need to know a little bit more information. So now, and that kind of falls in line with, determining the facts. So in the case of my Toastmaster friend, that's exactly what she was having. They were just having the exact same thing. They were talking about the exact same thing, but they didn't know it because they were delivering two different things. Their perception was off. And so fortunately, they were able to work things out and communicate for the better and move forward. But when you're putting the pieces together on any type of situation, if you think about it, this push-pull situation of somebody has a message that they're sending and somebody has a message that they're receiving, and we need to make sure that we get all the facts and that we're polite and we have empathy to the other person, because sometimes they can't remove the emotion. If it's something that's so important to them that they may not be able to do that, so it's up to us on the receiving end to try and help to redirect that so that we can take the emotion out and so that we can move forward. And sometimes that does mean you need to compromise in different situations. It doesn't mean you always do, but sometimes that solution does mean a compromise, because remember, we're trying to find out or figure out the best solution that everybody can be okay with, because it's fair for that particular moment or for that particular issue. Now, the downside of all this, or the dark side of all of this, is, can there ever be a stalemate? Yes, there most definitely can. But don't let that stop you. Sometimes the solution that you find to be the most uncomfortable is the one that provides you with the best opportunity. And I really hold true to that, because no solution works in every type of situation. And the last story I'm going to share with you today is the one about an intern, and that's where we talk about the stalemate. So I have, oftentimes I'll coach students that are still in college, especially those in the computer science programs, because I work in that industry as well, and I've seen oftentimes those folks tend to be the most, not naive, but they tend to be a little more on the naive side of what their worth is. Not all of them, but some of them tend to underplay the skills that they actually have, especially those that are really good at what they're doing. So I had this one gentleman that I worked with and coached that was an intern at a company here locally. And he loved his internship. He loved working there as an intern, and he was there for a couple years, and it became the point where he was graduating from college, and his manager had offered him a full-time job. Now, he came to me before he accepted the job because he said, Lisa, they are only offering me about $3 an hour more than what I'm getting as an intern. And I knew the programming position that he had. He was a software developer. And I knew what the market is here in Charleston. And I knew how good of a worker he was. And he had said to me, the reason I'm coming to you with this is there's another company that's recruiting me. And they're offering me about $10,000 more a year. And I said, okay, so let's talk about this. The company that you're already at now, that you're an intern, do you really want to stay there? I really would like to stay there. I really like the culture of the company, but I don't want to make less than somebody that's brand new off the street when I've already been there for 2 years and I know I should be making more than $3 more an hour. I said, okay. I said, well, what's the thing that you like about the other company? The thing I like about the other company is they have pretty much the same culture. They have a lot of room for opportunity for growth, and they have different benefits. Okay, so this is what you need to do or think about doing. If you go back to your manager at the current company and you tell them you want to accept their offer under the terms of what you want as a salary, or else you're not going to stay, you need to be prepared for that. And he asked me, well, what did that mean? What do I need to be prepared for? Well, you need to think about all the possible scenarios. First scenario is they give you what you want. Second scenario is the manager says no, and they just let you go. So in that case, of course, you're obviously free to go to the other company. He said, well, what's the other scenario? I said, well, the other scenario is the person that's the program manager over your manager gets wind of you turning down the offer. They ask them why you're turning down the offer, and they find out that you asked for more money and the manager told you no, and then the program manager says, no, we want to give you that money, and then you accept the job, you need to understand if you're okay with living with the consequence of your relationship with your immediate manager will never be the same again. They will look at you as if you undermine them going forward. And in the tech industry, and that's in many industries, but especially in the tech industry, that's exactly how it's looked upon. And he said, I didn't really think about it that way. So what he did in the end was, we talked a little bit about the offer from the other company. I told him that he should ask for a little bit more than what they were offering him and see what they say, and politely thank the other folks for the efforts and the faith that they had in him for giving him the internship, and seriously think about going to the other company. And that's exactly what he did. And in turn, he actually ended up with $30,000 more a year than what the $10,000 original amount was. So I'm very happy for him. The guy has actually, in the last year, moved on to bigger and brighter things, and he's moved to New York City, and he's working there now. So when we talk about stalemate, sometimes, you know, that's a fear that he had is, oh, I won't have a job, or this other company won't come through for me. And yes, I understand that not everybody can afford to make that kind of a play, but sometimes you have to have enough faith in yourself and enough faith in your abilities to do what's right for you. And that's why I tell that story, because I don't want people to think that they have less value than what they really should, because we're all valuable, and we should never be afraid to stand up for ourselves, and we should all see the positive things inside us and let others see those as well. And so sometimes that's a type of conflict, though, is it's an internal conflict for one, which way do I go, what do I do? But then he's got the conflict, of course, with dealing with which job do I take and how do I tell the boss that I don't want to leave there? Because sometimes for some of us, that's even hard to just say I'm moving on to another company. So one of the things we're going to do now is recap on our action strategy. So remember, we're always going to be respectful to people when we're solving problems, and we're going to do our best to think about solving those problems in a constructive manner. We don't want to take things personally. We always want to try and separate the people from the problems. Just because somebody's emotional and has an issue that they're bringing to our attention, remember, they're sending us a message that we're receiving, so we need to do our best to listen and hear what they're saying, understand what they're saying, then start to talk and ask those questions so that we can truly understand what the problem is. And don't be afraid to actually document those facts so that you can come back on the situation when you're actually doing your problem-solving phase, so you can make sure that you're actually solving the problem at hand. You know, sometimes some people try to digress and move on to other things as well. So make sure you're open to options. Sometimes, you know, you have that common ground again that you're finding, but it's that situation that everybody can live with under those circumstances. And again, it may take somebody that's the mediator of the group that's actually coming back and saying, okay, I understand this is not the optimal solution, but we need to come up with something that's fair for everybody under these circumstances. And you'll find that people are often willing to do that if they are heard. If they feel like they're heard, if they feel like they're understood, and if they are allowed to if they are emotional and if they are allowed to let the emotion run its course, they know that they have your ear, and then you're able to get those options going. You're able to do that creative problem solving and get the blood circulating in a more positive direction. And so that way you have the opportunity to grow as a team. So my call to action to you are to think about adding these tips to your toolbox, your mental toolbox, so the next time you're able to find, when you actually are in a conflicting situation, you're able to make sure you're understanding the problem, you're hearing what the people are saying, you're asking those questions, and you're taking the emotion out so that what could have been a very uncomfortable experience turns out to be a positive one that works for everybody in that particular situation. So I'm hoping folks have some questions. If not, I'll invite Bob to jump back on. But that's the entire presentation, but I'm anxiously awaiting to hear from anybody.
That's outstanding, Lisa. Thank you very much. So if you have any questions, go ahead and find your mute button, get off mute, and ask them now.
Can you guys hear me?
It's a little soft, but we can hear you.
All right. I want to add on to what Lisa was saying. You know, you said active listening, and I think it's our errors of when we came up. What we used to say in years past, which is now translated to active listening, is what's known as effective listening. And one of the things I would encourage people to do with effective listening is to be able to have dialogue that, when necessary, ask the appropriate questions so you know you're on the same page.
Absolutely.
Too many times people will make an assumption from what somebody said. So if you just simply say, hey, if I understand you correctly, you mean this. And if you're on board, you know you can proceed. Because one of the things that I think happens too many times is we're too quick to assume what the person said as opposed to validating what they said.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that works, Glenn. I'm glad you brought it up in that context, too, because that actually works even at home. And I'll tell you quickly an example of why that even works at home. I have a 14-year-old teenager in the house, and he's not real big on talking about, as most teenagers are, about opening up and having a dialogue unless it's something that he just happens to be really enthralled with. But if I'm asking a question or trying to get more information from him, sometimes he clams up, as teenagers often do. But what I've taken to doing is I'll ask him a question and he'll give me a yes or no answer, and then he'll give a little bit more dialogue, but then I make sure that I iterate back to him and say, so what I'm hearing is you don't want to do this because, so I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. Or if he looks at me and I say something to him and he looks at me as if, I'm speaking Greek, I'll say, okay, so from the look on your face, it looks like you're not understanding. I'm not doing a good job of communicating this so that you understand me. So what can I do to help you better understand? What part, where's the breakdown? What part don't you understand, so that I can actually rephrase maybe what I'm saying?
And there we just did effective listening.
Right. Absolutely.
Lisa, I have a question, and that has to do with if you have conflict with a peer, a coworker, and you cannot resolve it, are there any best practices as to when you take that to management to solve?
I thank you so much for asking that question, and it's not really meant to be a plug, but I'm actually developing another webinar that talks about this particular scenario more in depth. And it actually speaks to one of the things that I don't know that people realize or not, that's becoming more and more prevalent in the workplace, unfortunately, is bullying at work. And so I'm actually working on something for that. But when we're just talking about peers, there's definitely situations of conflict. And I think the hardest thing when taking it to a manager, at least in my experiences, is when you take it to the manager that doesn't know how to manage people. And when I say manage people, part of that means they should be able to be that mediator for you in that situation. Like when we were talking about the person that was at the meeting with the manager and the Toastmaster member that was at the meeting, and they were on that, she thought the program was one thing and the other person thought it was the other thing, and so they weren't having that meeting of the minds. I think in that situation, while I wasn't there, had they had somebody in on that conversation with them to kind of play that mediator role, so that basically doing that, helping them to be that effective listener, I think that would have helped in that situation. I've been involved in that type of situation before. I actually end up having to do that a lot at work because I manage the program and I have my government customer who's ultimately paying the bill that says, well, I don't know why the people in Hawaii think they get everything the way they want and this and that, whatever. And then I have to explain to him, well, this is the way they're looking at it. Let's think about it from their point of view, because they're the ones that are using the tool, and a lot of times they'll have the brakes on. And then I'll say, but let's think about how the other organizations would think. And so I give him a bunch of examples, and then he'll say, oh, okay, well, I didn't think about it that way. That's a good point. So maybe we should think about doing that. So and I don't know, Bob, if that's a case of an opportunity. I don't know. It depends a lot on the manager. I think if you're comfortable enough with talking with that manager, hopefully it's a manager that's one that is acting for fairness when it comes to a situation like that. I don't want to knock the situation too much, but I can tell you sometimes managers think about only what's good for the company, so it depends on the situation, and I don't know if it's something I could maybe help with, or that you had a particular thought maybe that we could talk about offline, or if it's just you just had a general question. I'm trying not to be too vague, but not too detailed, if that makes sense.
That's fine. I had nothing particular in mind. That's just always something that comes up in the workplace is
right.
At what point does it benefit you to take it to the next level?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had a situation where I asked for mediation because I was actually had a peer that was basically undermining me consistently, and so I had actually confronted her with it and had said, I don't understand what the problem is, why this is happening, but I'd like to resolve this. And she was not. She unfortunately was very emotional over it. And so I had asked for a situation of mediation. Things did work out in the end, but it was a tough situation. And what would have helped, though, is if I had a manager at that point that would have been more the mediator that I was looking for, instead of kind of, a lot of times managers will just say, oh, well, you guys go figure it out for yourself, and they don't want to get involved. And I think a lot of times it's because they don't have the skill set to get involved. And so they, things just like anything else we do, we're not going to go be a downhill skier if we don't know how to do that. So we shy away from it, kind of a thing. It's not maybe the best analogy, but that does happen.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? All right, last call. Well, Lisa, thank you again for this presentation. This is very appropriate presentation for us, not only in Toastmasters clubs, but in our real life, in work and our home life. So thank you very much. We look forward to hearing you again when you figure out your next presentation.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. I hope everybody found at least one thing of value here, because that definitely was my goal, whether it be a different way of thinking, doing, acting, or just knowing what to anticipate the next time. So hopefully everybody found some value.
Great. All right. Thanks again, and this will conclude our webinar for tonight.
Have a great night,
Good night, everybody.